Adventure Ho, Illumineers! Welcome back to the next episode of Ducktail Dads, a Lorcana podcast. I am your host for this episode, Ryan. I am again joined by Mack and Nathaniel, and today we're going to be talking about the second installment of our staple series or our core ink color series, and we're going to be talking about the Amethyst ink color. One of the things that I gravitated towards when I first started playing Lorcana. But let's start off with how we always start off. Mack, what's new in your world?
Yeah, what's new in my world? A little bit of a downer. I am battling in my yard. I am battling some gophers. This past week, we've had some gopher holes pop up in our backyard, and right now I am fighting hard, tooth and nail, trying to crush all the tunnels that they've created in my yard, shovel up all the dirt that has now been exposed, and trying to capture and get them the heck out of here. So that's kind of my outside of Lorcana experience. But on the flip side, for those of you who listened to last week's podcast or last episode, I met Christian in person, and he
Hey!
is a joy. He is a wonderful human being, just as he came off in our last episode. It was a joy to meet him in person. We met at a local store, one of I've never been to before. There was a draft night over the past weekend. And so I invited him or let him know of it. And he was like, yeah, I'll stop by. Let's do it. And then so Nathaniel was there as well. So it was my first experience with draft. I really enjoyed it. Got some tips on how to prioritize draft versus just having a full core constructed mindset when it comes to that. But yes, Christian, amazing human being. Really enjoyed last episode with him and hoping to learn a little bit more about the game from him along the way too, as I try and continue to get better at this game.
Ain't that something? It's great when you meet people in person and they're just as cool as they were when you met them virtually. Nathaniel, what's new in your world?
Well, I'll continue my theme of sharing one Lorcana and one personal life thing. This weekend, I actually installed some new floors in my house, and it was very challenging. Mack helped with a huge dad tip of get some knee pads, but man, muscles I haven't used in a while, and it was a lot of work, but I really like how it turned out. Thrilled to be done with the project now. And also this weekend, I took a break from that project and did get to go to my second ever draft, where Mack, another friend of ours, and myself met up with Christian and Ernie, who will be coming on here in a few episodes.
Hey.
Ernie is my pseudo kind of coach when I need some tips on Lorcana or just some more training and knowledge just in general. He's such an amazing resource. Really excited to have him on here. That was my second ever draft, as Mack had mentioned, and I was reminded how different it is and how when you're picking cards. I grabbed a lot of little guys, and Mack and I both went 2-1, but we both got absolutely smashed by this one guy who I think got first or second on the day.
He went 3-0, yeah.
He's a great player. His name's Ben, and he knew how to build a deck that follows a nice curve and is well suited for draft. And then you know what? Draft can actually change based on the set. So I think that's an important consideration as well, based on what cards are powerful. Again, more learning for sure. And draft is a very, very fun way to interact with Lorcana. I highly recommend, if you haven't ever done it, go try it out.
Yeah, I want to jump in again with that. I had the benefit of sitting next to Ernie with draft. So the first round, I was passing cards to him, and then after the last round, you keep your final card. And he, leaned over to me and he said, "What were your last two options?" So then I showed him the last two, and he was like, "You should have taken the one you passed me." So he was just like, yeah, your 4, 5, and 6 drops tend to do very well in a draft style, which something my mindset was, what I learned about sealed is that evasive tends to be very effective in that format. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to grab hyper aggro and evasive characters. And then what I learned from Ernie is that those 4, 5, 6 drops, once the initial lower drop characters are removed from the board, those ones tend to stick longer, as you can imagine, and they do very well in that draft because it's harder to remove because you're not building to remove. Something I learned with draft, it went very well. Like Nathaniel said, I made it to the final round against Ben, but Ben, man, he had two 2 drops, 2 3 drops, 2 4 drops, 2 5. He had the perfect, and he knew exactly what cards he was looking for when he went in. So I definitely learned a lot just getting absolutely smashed by him in the final round. But yeah, overall, it was really fun.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've talked about when playing the game too is this idea of board control, are you focusing on building a big inkwell, card advantage, right? And some of the things that Christian had even talked about on our last episode. And with this current set, there's not a lot of card draw, and there's not really, I think, a whole lot of ramp options. So I think kind of what Mac and I probably both learned is board control was kind of everything with this draft. And again, getting into those mid-game characters of 4, 5, and 6 drop characters was absolutely crucial, and something that Ben used to great effect against both of us.
Wow, that sounds like an incredible experience. Wish I could have made it, but I'm glad you guys had a great time at that event. It sounds like I definitely need to check out Draft in the future. Previously, I'd written it off as something that I would feel very uncomfortable doing, of passing packs or passing cards that I had ripped. Were there any big rips, or who was the big winner on the day with that card?
Nathaniel.
So shiny, baby! Pulled the small crab. I don't think he's so shiny. I think that's the big crab. But
Would you say you
Yeah.
were happy as a clam?
I would say I was happy as a clam. I finally had a good pull for Marquesia's Island. Let's go. It was
That's
awesome.
huge.
Ryan, it was funny. He did not put that card in his deck. As soon as he pulled it, it immediately went in the top loader, and he's like, nope. So you end up with 48 cards, and you build a deck of 40. So that was one of his 8 he just did not want to touch and risk having it damaged while he was shuffling it.
You were just saying 6 drops do very well, though, so why not include it? What the heck?
Remember, I learned that. I had to get my butt kicked first by those characters, because for me, I was like, ooh, 6, that's a lot of ink, and by the time I get to that point in the game, I'm not going to have any cards to, in my hand left. So, yeah, I did insta-sleeve and top load and push off to the side, but in the future, he'd be good.
And last point on this, I pulled the legendary Minnie Mouse, so I was like, oh, a nice aggro option, a low-cost aggro option. She was absolutely useless. I tried her once, nothing worked. So yes, it was definitely a learn-as-you-go moment for both of us, but now we have something to look forward to the next time we do it. So that was my biggest takeaway.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? Well, new in my world, kind of along the same lines in the Lorcana realm. I've been wheeling and dealing, trying to make some purchases and get the cards that I wanted, just trying to buy singles. Resorted or that's the word I'm looking for. I have given up the dream of buying a booster box of Arcadia's Island, to be honest with you. So just committing that money to buying the singles that I really, really want to see and that I actually want to include and play with, for the most part, and had a couple other ones that I'm thinking like, maybe I want it, maybe I just wanted to have it for the future if something else comes up. So I've been pretty happy with the results of that so far and got all the singles I'm looking for. Almost finished out the Sapphire Steel deck I'm building, and almost finished out a second deck that I'm building for my significant other as well, so she can play something other than the purple cards that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But before we get to that, there was major news dropped immediately after we recorded our last podcast and immediately prior to us releasing our last podcast. So we have to mention it. The first ban of cards in Lorcana. Thoughts on the Hiram ban, Nathaniel or Mack? Where do you want to start with this one?
Guess who's off blue-red? This guy. Lasted 1 day, and I'm gone. Back to purple steel. I'm so happy the rat is gone. He's banished forever. Sorry if we're holding on to some of those because his value has absolutely tanked. But I think really positive things have happened since this. A lot of cards became viable now. A lot of decks became viable. It feels really wide open right now, which again, I think stuff will settle in and we'll kind of figure out what's good. But I think this has opened the door to a lot of other cards right now. And as somebody who has really enjoyed playing Purple Steel, it feels like it was already in a pretty good spot pre-ban, and now it's in a great one. So I'm really pleased for that reason. And yeah, I mean, I think Mac, you as a blue-red player had some great perspective and you weren't overly mad about this. So I think that was very, very mature of you.
Yeah. I'll get into my thoughts in a minute. I know Ryan has some thoughts on this first, so I'll let him speak to it first.
I just want to bring up the fact that if you look at the deck lists from this last weekend, which is the first weekend of largely competitive play since the ban, it feels like set 7 almost doesn't exist? Question mark.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of set 6. Everything's reverted back to where we were at the end of set 6, right before set 7 dropped. It almost seems like people are like, maybe I don't want these set 7 cards at all now. And I think we're going to see that definitely shift back. And I feel like people were just like panic, like, I have 4 days to prepare for this major event that I'm going to. I'm not trying to test out new set 7 stuff right now. I'm just going to go back to what I was playing on set 6 and we'll go from there. So I think if you were to like look at the graph and you had, the ink colors that were popular in the events as as a course of time, if you just cut out the chunk from set 7 drop to ban to Hiram ban and Fortisphere ban for that matter, I think you just see a perfect continuum where it just carries on right where it left off because I think people just reverted back to set 6. And I'm nervous that that happened because I want to see the game progress and I want to see new things happen and I want to see new decks succeed. I just don't feel like that was represented in the weekend of competitive play. And that's the only point I wanted to make on that. I think it'll adjust and it'll shift as people have more time to test things now. But I did notice that when I was looking through the deck list, like, man, there's like no set 7 out here. And even when it is there, they're just inking it, and it's like a chip the teacup in their deck. They're just tossing it down for ink and moving on with their day.
Right. I think with set 7, right, we still see the Tamatoa. We obviously still see the Bell. I don't think Blue Steel really changed much over the last week. Yes, Fortisphere happened too. We should mention that. Fortisphere was also banned, and that ink combo was affected by that, along with the Hiram. But Donald. I keep calling him Donald. It's the Scrooge legendary with being able to try and retrieve some items throughout your deck or being able to look for items. There's some viability there as well. The item decks I think still have some play. What is it? There's the dual ink Diablo, right? We see the little
Yep.
Diablo and the expansive Diablo decks now that especially Hiram and has kind of lowered the tier of Ruby Sapphires, especially. That was kind of the biggest killer of the Amethyst Emerald build. So we've seen a great increase in popularity in any sort of Diablo deck. But I would agree with you, Ryan. The thing about the ban, although I think in the long term it'll be healthy for the game, I've loved seeing the amount of variability in deck lists. But yes, it's kind of reverted back to a set 6 feel. And I think it's going to take 2 sets to really get to where Ravensburger wants the game to be. I think, unfortunately, Reign of Jafar is already printed. It's not released. They've already balanced Reign of Jafar, and they're already printing Reign of Jafar in preparation for the next release in a couple months. And I really have no idea how far Ravensburger plans out sets or is done testing a set before they have to get it to print in order to prepare for release. So maybe set 9 is where we start seeing some adjustment, and it could bleed into even set 10 if set 9 is already done being tested. So
Sure.
it'll be curious to see. I think long term, this could be a 6-month wait to where we really see new cards in kind of to quote unquote replace Hiram, so to speak,
And Fortisphere.
and Fortisphere for balancing purposes. But who knows? I know one of the things too, and Nathaniel, you had some good points when we've talked privately about it, and I'm hoping you'd share too. Fortisphere seemed a little odd to a lot of people, especially around the community, and you seem to think that it could be something coming up. They kind of preemptively banned Fortisphere. You want to give some thoughts on that before we really start digging into the Hiram side of things, because I know that's been the talk of the town.
Yeah, so I think the Fortisphere thing was a little weird because I think people had anticipated, like, if there were to be a ban, it was going to be Popsicle. That would be a little bit tough, I think, on Sapphire to lose both Hiram and Popsicle, so I think that was part of this. But the other part of it, I think there were 2 reasons. One, the part that they advertised is the reason Fortisphere got banned is because it doesn't really match the identity of Steel. Like an item that you play and draw, like it's not quite like your usual Steel archetype, I guess. That was sort of what Ravensburger, I think, had advertised as the main reason. I think that it could also very much have to do, and this is an assumption, but I think a lot of us tend to associate Jafar as a purple Steel card, and especially now with like dual inks coming out, right? You look at your Giant Cobra, your illusions, they're all purple or purple steel, amethyst or amethyst steel. So I think the idea is that Jafar will have synergies with purple and or steel cards or both, and something would maybe also kind of spiral downwards in the next set when Reign of Jafar releases using Fortisphere. So they could not only kind of beat that before it happens, they can also slow down this avalanche of blue that was happening in this set between blue steel and blue red.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take. I over the course of the week, now that we have had time to think about it, that makes sense to me, right? It seemed a little bit odd that Fortisphere was the target as opposed to Popsicle, but then you would completely diminish almost any sort of Sapphire value if you remove 2 of the more staple cards for that ink color, and more. You think about it, there are a lot of good, strong bodyguards too already in Steel, and Fortisphere Fortisphere also has that secondary effect where you can give someone bodyguard, so maybe there's thoughts on being able to implement some sort of bodyguard tool with another item, or not really item, just another steel card in general in an upcoming set. Who knows? But that one seemed more preventative rather than reactive with regards to the Hiram side of things. Ryan, any thoughts on Fortisphere on your side? I know you really don't play much steel. I guess you've dived a little bit into it with this set because you're switching over to the Sapphire Steel side, but any thoughts from your end on that?
Yeah, honestly, the Fortitude hurt the consistency a lot. I think there's options to replace it. I just think you introduce a lot of extra dead draws late in the game that you don't really want to see. So it's kind of this, it changes up your mulligan a little bit if you do include other items in there that could be potential replacements in the Sapphire Steel realm for the aggro list at least. Sapphire Steel items, I guess I don't really know that it survives without the Fortisphere. They really needed that for the consistency for the draw aspect. I think you could still get around it because you don't have as many dead draws if you already have a workshop on the field, but then you're so much more dependent on finding workshop early in order to make sure that you can get draws off of every item that you play. So I think there could be still an avenue for Sapphire Steel to find its path, to find its way. It would be a little bit more of a risky path. I think it would be more of like the Chicha for extra draw. It might be the Oswald, really just gambling. If you're really feeling lucky one day, just run the Oswald build and see how it goes. But I think it is very highly dependent on finding that workshop to make sure that any of the other items you put in place of Fortisphere are no longer dead draws in the sense where they're just free. They're one ink to draw a card off of the workshop effect. But in the aggro list, I think it hurt the consistency of it a lot. And so also introducing those dead draws, I think, slows down the aggro list a ton and opens it up for a lot of extra bricking and kind of just not being able to get over the line at the end of the game.
I also think, Ryan, to piggyback on what you just said about the consistency, I think I saw a number out there that said the big thing this set, right, with Sapphire Steel has been Belle and getting her out on turn 1 and then being able to sing a song with her on turn 2. That's been what has really given a lot of gasoline to that particular deck, especially when you're trying to go fast. And it does feel like I saw a number out there that said in a world where you had 8 one-drop items, so specifically Fortisphere and Popsicle, which replaced themselves because you could draw after you played them, so that was very beneficial for you. But in that world, you would hit the Bell turn 1 line 57% of the time. Without Fortisphere, that has now dropped to like 23%. So I think that's a big deal in terms of like that deck's ability to like stabilize early, knowing that like it's trying to just get like a few turns into the game, and have some of that power to really block things from an opponent early game.
Yep.
Good point. Good point. Well, I don't want to spend the entire episode talking about the Hiram ban. Any last thoughts or any closing remarks on the Hiram and Fortisphere ban? We should make sure we're including Fortisphere in this talk too.
Yeah, now the Hiram talk. I looked it up. I have it pulled up on my screen right now. The 5 stages of grief. And I feel, as ridiculous as it sounds, I definitely went through a Lorcana stages of griefs over the course of the last week.
Tell us more.
The day it was announced, Connor, who we've had as a guest in a previous episode, was the one that kind of dropped the link in our friend group. Instantly pulled up the link, read what was described, and I was in denial. I was like, no way this can happen. My deck is gone. I don't know when I'm going to run for set champs. I'm going to have to think of something new to practice in order to prepare. We're only a couple weeks away from set champ season. And then obviously that turned into anger. Like, how could they do this? They ruined all sense of my deck's viability. I don't know what to do. And then I was one of those that messaged Ravensburger, as ridiculous as it sounds, got into the bargaining stage. Like, you owe an explanation to your community as to why this decision was made. Keep in mind, this was all within like 3 or 4 hours, and I didn't even notice that they were planning to have some sort of live stream Q&A like that day in the afternoon. So I could have just been a little patient on it. And then after like it settled in, after like the next day, a little bit of depression, like, oh man, I don't know.
Back to the drawing board. Here we go again.
Am I even going to do well in the set 7 set champs? And now I'm definitely in acceptance. All of that acceptance goes to thank you, DKP, a prominent Ruby Sapphire player. This past weekend, he won a major tournament I wouldn't say major, a good mid-tier size tournament, over
128 people. That's
yeah,
a pretty
128
big battle
people.
bear.
Yeah, and he won with his Ruby Sapphire build that I've been testing now over the past couple of days, and I seem to be getting the hang of it. So I'm more in the acceptance. Hiram's gone. There's nothing I can do about it. I've had to learn a different way to filter through my deck. But, all jokes aside, Hiram, I think from a balancing perspective, was probably the most broken card in the game because of his high willpower and his ability triggered not only on the play, but every time he quested. So it was so hard for your opponent to remove him within the turn of you playing him. So to get a 4-cost character with such high willpower, you were able to draw 4 cards, because odds are he was going to be able to quest and banish another item to draw an additional 2 cards. So I think in hindsight, it's good for the game, because I could see the game becoming stale, because all the lists that we saw over the course of the first couple weeks of set 7 were Ruby Sapphire and then a Sapphire Steel, and that was like 75% of what people were running at tournaments. So, and now we have 10 different ink combinations over the course of this past week in a lot of these tournaments now that have come out since, or that have been played and executed since the Hiram and Fortisphere ban. So overall, really good for the game. I've come to accept that and it's allowed me to explore it. I'm now diving into Ruby Amethyst as well as a Blurple style deck, Amethyst Sapphire. So it's allowed me to expand new horizons, so to speak, when it comes to testing out different ink colors in this game.
I do want to piggyback on one of the things Mack said. I always thought Hiram's stat line was kind of funny, like 1-6. He might as well be 0-6, right? He's never challenging something. He is always a draw engine. It can in every deck, right? I don't think you're ever like, oh, I won that game because I swung into something with my Hiram. Like I think if they had just balanced that stat line a little bit, maybe he's like a 2-4 or a 2-3. He becomes a little bit less broken. But I think with a physical TCG, it's probably easier to ban a card than to do the errata thing like they did with Bucky. That was early enough in the game where you could probably do something like that. I think now it becomes probably far more likely that a card gets banned, and then maybe in the future it comes back into some sort of limited rotation, but it's an easier way to Mack's point, block the game from becoming stale and keep the interest high and robust with lots of different viable decks. I think that's really important for the game to stay healthy, and that is what is happening. So that did have the desired effect, at least for the short term.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right with that. And I think one of the ink colors that benefited the most from the Hiram ban, arguably, is Amethyst. So this is a very very timely episode for us. So let's dive into some of the meat and potatoes, what we really want to talk about here on this podcast. This is the second installment of our staple series, and this is the Amethyst ink color, which is also known as purple. We'll refer to it as purple too many times throughout our conversations around the game. A brief overview of what this color is, the main core staples, the core identity of Amethyst that I understand it to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mack and Nathaniel. So one being draw power, finding ways to dig through your deck, lots of cards that replace themselves or draw multiple cards or draw a card here or draw a card there. Bouncing or interplay effects that require you to also remove a card from your play field, where it can be used, if you can manage that and leverage it to use it in a beneficial way, which some of the cards are designed to do that for you. And that's where a lot of the power of Amethyst can come in. And then the enter and leave play effects as well. So, and other trading card games or other games of sorts, these are referred to as like battle cry or death rattles. So where it's unique in this Amethyst and unique in Lorcana is that it's when this gets played and when this leaves play for these particular Amethyst cards. And I believe it's just the Merlin cards that do that, if I'm not mistaken. Just the Merlin cards with both the enter and leave play, which is slightly different than being banished, because when they get removed from play and bounce back to your hand as cost for playing another card, that bounce effect, if you will, that we just referred to, and that is where that is leaving play as well. So you get the bonus, or you get the effect to trigger both when you play it out of your hand and when it returns to your hand. Anything else to add in terms of the core identity?
Drawing cards, baby.
Just draw as many cards as possible. And as Christian mentioned, you have card advantage and you have board advantage. Amethyst is really trying to weigh heavily and lean heavily on that card advantage for finding you victories.
Yeah, and I will say too, and we'll dive into it when we get to the 1, 2, 3, staple cards in each cost. But Amethyst, I feel, has some of of the best locations in the game, or viable meta locations. So that's something to keep in mind as well. As they got two really staple locations in the library and Queen's Castle, and we'll talk about their effects in a little bit and how powerful they truly are when it comes to the Amethyst ink color.
Absolutely. And I should take a moment to mention that my significant other was one of the main reasons why I gravitated towards Amethyst in the first place. When I was introduced to Lorcana, I thought, what colors do I want to play? And we talked a little bit about that in a previous podcast too, of how do you decide what colors you want to play. And it's all picking what suits your play style, what suits how you like to play the game, how you like to play any game for that matter. And one of the things that I've realized over the last few years, 5, 10 years of playing other board games or other deck building games with my significant other is that the incredible and incredibly powerful effect of simply drawing cards. And that's the main goal of everything that she does in every game is just draw as many cards as I possibly can. And that way I win. And so that's why I gravitated towards Amethyst to begin with. So shout out to learning new things as we're playing board games on the side too. So the types of deck that this Amethyst in color is involved in. Typically, I mean, there's no in my mind, there's really no typical deck type that Amethyst is involved in because it's such a complementary color, because it's such a strong drawing color. You draw so many cards off of it that it's really helpful in every type of strategy that you're implementing. But there's aggro or aggro lists that are trying to win as fast as possible and accumulate as much lore as possible. So there's Amethyst Steel that can drop down and play really low to the ground, really low curve, really low ink cost. It's also Amber Amethyst, which is kind of like a hyper aggressive build in some regards, where you're just dropping two quester after two quester after two quester, turn after turn after turn, sometimes multiple on the same turn, and just saying, here are the questions that I'm asking of you to your opponent, and if you don't have the answers to every single one of them, then I'm going to get to 20 and win, so good luck. And then there's the mid-range-ish with Amethyst Steel can also go mid-range-ish, and the same with the Amethyst Sapphire or Blurple that can also go into the mid-range category where you're really hammering home on those turns 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or those ink levels of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you have some options in the early game, some options in the late game, but really your bread and butter is right in the middle and trying to figure out a way to get over the line and find that middle ground. And then there's also the control variants. So there's Ruby Amethyst, which is the staple, which I understand to be the mainstay of control for the last 5 sets now, since set 2, I've heard, where Ruby Amethyst seems to pop up no matter what happens with the meta. Ruby Amethyst always pops up and rears its head at some point in some of the major events in a fashion that is likening it to a heavy control deck with the way that Ruby complements the Amethyst draw power.
Yeah, Ruby Amethyst definitely since a set 2 staple because of all the Amethyst cards that were released in set 2. So we'll get into that specifically when we start going through those as well. But yeah, Amethyst is, I want to reiterate, Ryan, I would say it's the best complementary color in the game. Drawing is so powerful in this game. Touching base in our conversation with Christian in our previous episode, he talked about board control and I forget the other phrase he used, but like card control in a sense.
Card advantage and board advantage, what he phrased it as, yeah.
Yeah, and Amethyst is top tier out of all the inks when it comes to card advantage. It gives you your card advantage over your opponent more so than any other ink color, and it works really well. The reason why Ruby Amethyst is such a good pair is that the Ruby gives you the board advantage with all of those stronger rush characters, higher willpower, higher strength characters, and then obviously the board control when you get to be prepared, or even single cards like a simple Brawl or a Medusa or whatnot with Ruby. So that's why kind of the Ruby Amethyst has been a staple ever since set 2, and a lot of these stronger Amethyst cards were released.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that as the draw engine making it the most complementary color. There's basically been success, I think, with every single other color. I mean, you look at NACC, the first place deck in Swiss was Mo Shamblin ran a purple green, so Amethyst Emerald deck. Ruby Amethyst was one with Ed Chu who won the whole thing, right? Like, it is because of this natural card draw. We can't stress enough that is such a powerful effect. What we talked about last week with Amber struggling for natural card draw, this is what Amethyst is all about. It is such a good thing to shift in to get you that continuous draw power. It does it better than any other ink color. And I want to talk about one more thing with this particular ink color is this is probably one of the few inks where you could almost viably run a mono ink deck and have some success if you really wanted to. That last set, I think there was probably about 45 core cards in almost every Amethyst deck. And then it was just a matter of, are you running Ruby Amethyst? Are you running Amethyst Steel as your other kind of quarter or so of your deck? So it is pretty close. And I've actually seen some people run what felt like a mono-colored deck until turn 6 when they finally inked a different color. And I'm like, oh, okay, so that's the other ink, because they've just been playing purple, 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 purple. So it is, I think that is kind of unique about it in the sense that not only can it almost be viable as mono, but like it is a lot of times the majority of the deck build is Amethyst cards.
Yeah. That I think someone even popped up a mono amethyst build for a set champs at somewhere in the United States at some point at the end of set 6 to that point where and now it seems like there's even more viable ones after looking at this weekend's deck lists of, if you can play the Peter Pans in combination with the Iagos now, and that's a huge board swing as well, which is really interesting. We won't talk about this specifically, I think, in this conversation, but it does seem like mono amethyst is a very viable option if you really wanted to test yourself and see how it went. When I was looking at my set 6 Amethyst Sapphire deck, I think I had a total of 14, maybe 15 Sapphire cards, and 8 of those were the turn 2 ramp options, and then another 3 of those was the Hades at the end of the game. It was just like, wow, this is mostly a purple deck. And if you can wrap your head around it and play it to the max, then it is incredibly powerful. So some of those cards that we want to talk about, the typical meta, why these are staple cards, things to be familiar with, things to think about when you're facing off against a purple deck, or an amethyst deck, whether it's a mono amethyst deck or if it's paired with any other ink color. So some of the cards to think about, the mainstays are the Madam Mims and the Merlins, and that's where I wanted to start. We'll start with the Madam Mims. So there's 2 Madam Mim cards that are really played in almost every Amethyst deck, and they're starting to kind of work their way out now. But Madam Mim Fox is a 3 ink cost, a 4 strength, 3 willpower, quests for 1. But the major thing is that it has Rush, and so when it enters the field, it can attack immediately. That's a major bonus to playing the Madam Mim Fox card. The cost of that, since it is overstated for its cost, the cost of playing the card is returning something to your hand, and that's where that bounce effect comes in, and it actually can be beneficial to you in many instances if you're leveraging it correctly. So Madam Mim Fox is the first one, and then Madam Mim Snake is the second one that I wanted to talk about. So it's Madam Mim Snake is this 2 cost, 3/3, 3 strength, 3 willpower, quest for 1, and again overstated for its ink cost, but again the cost of playing the card is returning a character card from your field back to your hand. And again, like with Fox, if you leverage it correctly and return something that has a leave play effect as well, or return something with damage to effectively heal it up, then you are kind of protecting it in that sense. Thoughts on the Madam Mim cards?
Yeah, I think with the Madam Min cards, you mentioned overstated, but the drawback is the bounce. When I first read these cards, I thought it was just an awful ability. Like, what? I'm removing something from the game. Why is that beneficial towards me? Again, you mentioned the Merlins a little bit ago. A lot of the Merlins have a positive effect when they are removed from the board. So that's one example being Merlin Crab. Once he enters or leaves the board, you can give someone +3 strength or something like that when another character +3 strength. So again, if you put a fox in and you end up removing the crab, your 4/3 fox is now a 7/3 fox if you choose to have the fox have the +3 strength with the crab's effect. So that's highly effective, especially when it comes to removing some of these strong willpower locations that tend to see themselves in the meta. The other thing too is it saves your characters that might be exposed on the board. So if you have a very low or important character, another one of those Merlin cards, Merlin Rabbit, very smaller statted with 2 strength, 3 willpower. But if you're able to quest with Rabbit, it's now exposed for your opponent. But if you were to play a snake, you can then remove the rabbit and save it from being banished, so then you can play it later, utilizing the rabbit's ability to draw a card when it's both removed and it enters play. So that's something that I've had to get used to, getting used to Amethyst, especially when I joined shortly after set 3, when very much in the thick of it with the bounce packages with Amethyst. So that's another big reason is you can save a lot of your characters with the Madam Mim combo in the Fox and the Snake.
I saw a really cool thing that had talked about, while we're on the topic of Madam Mim and these bounce effects, that said an inexperienced player will tend to play Madam Mim's Snake on turn 2 and Fox on turn 3. And you might be saying, oh, well, okay, I'm getting an overstated character on board. The problem with doing something like that is you are bouncing your one character to play one character. You're now bouncing your one character to play one character. So after turn 3, you only have one character on board. So that's some of the, when we talk about like board control, especially coming out of Christian's podcast from our last episode, you're falling behind because you only have one character on the field now, and you haven't really done other stuff. You're not like loading up with items or other things. Those bounce effects, from having played the deck now for a little while, I've really found out how important those are in the mid to late game. So oftentimes in your opening hand with an Amethyst deck, you might not actually want to have a Madam Mim Snake. You might want to have it a little bit later so you can bounce something back once you kind of do have some established board presence. So I think that's an important thing to consider, because when I was first even practicing, even on like ink table, I kept falling behind on like board presence and losing that way. And it was like, oh, I'm bouncing stuff too early. I'm falling behind on the number of characters that I can do stuff with in that like turn 3, 4, and 5 because I've been bouncing things. So I think it's a really important effect, but it's also really important to get it right and when you actually do it. So to Mack's point, if you bounce a rabbit after it's like sung a song or something, or done some sort of action, you are now getting a card from when you played him and a card from when he leaves, and now you have him in your hand, so you're going to get to play him at least one more time, and he's probably going to leave another time. So bouncing him really gets you, essentially it nets you 2 extra cards because you get to play him and he'll leave an extra time. So I think that's where like getting the bounce right is something that takes practice, and something that I had to spend essentially an entire set learning how to do well in order to have some success with purple.
That's a really good point. And it takes time to get used to it too. It is a little bit of a counterintuitive effect, but it is very strong and very powerful when you're able to use it to its fullest effect. And not to toot your own horn, not to toot your horn or sing your praises too much, but I think that you have essentially learned very well and are very capable of playing the Mim Fox and Mim Snake to their fullest effect, Nathaniel, considering you won a set champs with them. A couple other cards that were in your deck, may have been in your deck for that set champs: Merlin Crab, Merlin Rabbit, Merlin Goat. So the other half, if you will, of the bounce package, as it is affectionately termed. Let's start with the 3 costs. So Merlin Crab is a 3 ink cost, 3 strength, 3 willpower, quest for 1. But the effect is that when it is played and when it leaves play, another character gets challenger plus 3. So not just 3 strength. It's not like that. It's just challenger plus 3. So it gets 3 additional strength only when it's challenging another character. The Merlin Rabbit is a 4 ink uninkable, a 4 ink cost uninkable, 2 strength, 3 willpower, quest for 1. And as we mentioned before, when it enters play, you draw a card. When it leaves play, you draw a card. And then Merlin Goat is the other staple Amethyst card that is a Merlin. It is a 4 ink inkable, 4 strength, 3 willpower, quest for 1. And when it enters play and when it leaves play, you gain a lore for it. So it's a way to kind of stretch out and gain more lore passively, if you will, or without having to let it sit on board in quest. So you get ink you get lore when you play it, lore when it leaves play. So that those Merlin cards paired with the Madam Mim package of Fox and Snake, and most commonly, and then the other Madam Mim cards that are out there too. That's what forms kind of what I think of as the most central, most core identity of Amethyst cards when any deck is being built. So it's effectively 20 cards, give or take a couple, if you're playing with ratios here and there.
Yeah, and what I want to mention about especially the Merlin cards is I think they're perfectly in tune from an early, mid, and late game type of card. We tend to see Merlin Crab earlier, especially giving the plus strength to a lower cost character that was maybe played earlier in the game, and just overstatting them, and then the cost for maybe a 1-drop, and you could use that 1-drop to take out your opponent's 3 or 4-drop, so that you get insane value utilizing the crab's plus 3 strength, and giving that to a lower cost character. So that's kind of the early stage. The mid stage is the rabbit. The rabbit allows you to draw cards you may have been filtering, or as your hand starts to get lower and lower throughout the game. The rabbit bounce is very effective in kind of replenishing your hand mid-stage in order to prepare for the late game, and that's where the goat comes in. It has insane closing power, being able to gain a lore on play and when it's removed from play. So as an opponent, something I really had to learn as a Ruby Sapphire player, one of the biggest counters to Ruby Sapphire, at least in some of the earlier sets, was Ruby Amethyst, because it utilized, once you got to that 14, 15, 16 lore stage as an Amethyst player who was running a Merlin goat, you had to be cognizant and you had to have a mindset that, shoot, if they start bouncing this goat back and forth, they can gain 4 or 5 lore real quick and just immediately close the game. So the Merlin, I think, is kind of perfectly adjusted to have an early, mid, and a late stage option for you in that Amethyst build.
Yeah, so I think something that you want to look out for while we're on the topic of the Merlin cards and the Madam Mim cards as well is if you are playing against an Amethyst player and they have 3 1-drops on the field, you need to be mindful about what you're doing with your characters. Because what they are probably going to be able to do on the next turn when they have 3 ink is either bounce one of those cheap characters back to their hand, replace it with a high statted 4/3 Fox that can challenge immediately. So if you're an Amber player and you turn your Daisy Duck sideways, there's a decent chance it's going to get one shot by or banished by a Fox. Now, the other thing here is we had talked with Christian, and I posed this question to him, like the concept of making positive trades. So, Mac, you touched on this. When you use a crab to buff up a 1-cost character, you are able to then have it trade up into a higher cost character, and that is a good strategy in over the course of a game, is you are making quote unquote positive trades. Now, one thing that a lot of players will like to do with purple cards is they will play the 1-cost Diablo, that is the Obedient Raven, that is a 0/1 stat line. And some more experienced players, if they have a crab in their hand, they might not actually quest with that Diablo. They might instead wait till the next turn, play the crab, buff the Diablo up, and then have it trade with something. So if you think about like bigger characters that have like 3/3 stat lines, the Diablo can challenge into that. They both go to the banish pile, but then you also get to draw a card. So you were able to trade your low-cost character up and draw, which is a very powerful thing for you to be able to do as early as turn 3. So you're not only are you getting card advantage, you're also making a quote-unquote positive trade. These Merlin and Mim characters help you make some of those types of trades over the course of the game, while, to your point, protecting characters as well by bouncing them back to your hand for safety.
Yes, you touched on one of the 1-cost characters and being the Diablo Obedient Raven, the 0/1 that draws a card when it is banished. The other 1-cost character that I think of as kind of the core staples, and this is kind of what I think of as rounding out the core staple package for the Amethyst cards, are the 1-cost characters that all kind of replace themselves or draw cards. So we mentioned the Diablo Obedient Raven. There's also Chernobog's followers, and I don't remember the subtext there, but it's a 1-cost 2/1 that when it quests, you may banish it to draw a card from it. And then the third one that's a 1-cost that replaces itself is the Magic Broom. And again, I don't remember the subtext, but it's 1-cost, 1/2 stat line, and 1 strength, 2 willpower. And then when you play another character, you may banish the broom to draw a card to replace itself. Those are really, really key and really core to the identity of Amethyst as well, in drawing you more cards and churning out into that mid to late game.
Hot take. Best 1-drops in the game, Amethyst ink color. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm a huge supporter of that hot take. Nathaniel and I actually had talked about this after he won his set champs of like, what does this Amethyst steel make up of? And I'll let him dive into it, but it is right along that line, Mac.
Yeah, I think it definitely has some unbelievable 1-drop characters. And the other part of this too that I think is really important is it's optional that it would draw you a card. They can still do other things like be bounce targets for foxes. They can still get, like I've traded a Chernobog's followers by buffing it up 3 with a crab, because now it's a 5/1 and it just swings into something way bigger, because that was even more beneficial for me than just drawing an extra card, right? Maybe it's like the Chernobog hits something, I don't know, like the Tamatoa Happy as a Clam, right? Like that would be an amazing trade if that was able to trade into that. I think the other thing that we haven't even talked about with all these characters that we haven't even, Ryan had mentioned like the cost of the character, and Rabbit is the only one we've talked about so far that is uninkable. So all these cards have these really powerful effects and they're inkable. So if you get them at the wrong time, or you just need to get ink, right? Like you don't brick as often, and sorry if we haven't used the term bricking very much on this podcast, but bricking is essentially I have a lot of uninkables in my hand or high cost things in my hand that I cannot play earlier in the game, and therefore I'm kind of stuck. So you can what calls like a dead turn, where you like don't get to ink something, or you don't really get to play nearly enough of or even any of the ink that you have in your inkwell. If that can snowball long enough, it's called bricking. And I think purple or amethyst does as good a job as most, maybe sapphire, of like protecting you from quote unquote bricking.
I think that's absolutely key and important. Does it have that insurance of either by drawing a card for you to have another option to ink or another option to play, or just by simply being inkable itself. It's a great way to avoid that bricking effect. In terms of budget-friendly options, I don't really think of these as high-cost cards and as the core staples that we've talked about so far. That's another like low barrier to entry for a lot of players is if you can wrap your head around this bounce package and these bounce enter and leave play effects, it's a very cost-effective way to kind of introduce yourself to more of a competitive deck. And there's like we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of possible combinations since Amethyst seems to be one of the most consistent and best complementary colors for ink colors in the game. Let's talk about some tech cards then. So let's start with the aggro line. I always giggle to myself whenever I'm talking about an aggro list and talking to Nathaniel because in my mind he's the that's his bread and butter. His go-to is just the aggro amethyst cards. So what is we just pick one out. Pick one out, Nathaniel. What is your current forerunner or number one favorite aggro tech card for the amethyst ink color?
I would say it's probably actually from the new set. I do really like the giant cobra. I think it provides you with some great options. People sometimes refer to this as like a burn card because you're like burning through your deck and your hand to just gain a lot of lore really rapidly. Depending on when I get this, it's another one of those characters where, oh, it's a 3 cost, right? You could play this on turn 3 and it's got this 4/4 stat line and it's really a buffed up character and you get 2 lore. It's not always the best card to have in your opening hand, to be honest. I kind of like getting that later in the game when my opponent's focused on preventing me from reaching 20 and I have that additional what we call reach. So the Cobra and Goat, so Merlin Goat, are 2 of the best quote unquote reach characters in the game where, to Mack's earlier point, when you hit that like 14, 15, 16 lore total, the opponent kind of now should say only have a couple turns left because there's a high likelihood that they will start using these reach cards to get that last kind of close that last bit of distance to 20.
Absolutely.
So I really like Giant Cobra. It does have the drawback, of course, with the vanish ability. So if it is targeted by an opponent's action, instead of whatever that action would do, you just banish the character. So that is a bit of a drawback, especially in what we would consider like a steel heavy meta, which we were kind of trending towards pre-Hiram ban. But even with that, I think the Cobra was in a lot of lists, at least as like a 3 of that were running purple steel or amethyst steel, sorry. So that would be probably my tech aggressive card.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll take the locations, and I'll let you, Ryan, because you have more experience with Amethyst, to take the kind of mid-range control cards. But
I love this. It's like we're sharing a brain. I love this.
yeah, awesome. So the library and Queen's Castle are the 2 most popular locations that we see out of this ink color. The library being a very high willpower and only for a 3 cost. I think it's 8 willpower, and it only takes 1 to move a character to this location, with the added benefit of if a character is banished while here, you get to draw a card. So this works really well, especially with your 1 cost drops, the Chernobog's followers, the Diablo, and the Magic Brooms, because they all replace themselves. If they are banished while they're at that location, not only do they replace themselves, you also get an additional card. So you get to draw 2 with that whenever they're banished there, and you utilize their ability, I'll say, so to speak. So the library has seen a lot of play, especially from a competitive standpoint. Because of its high willpower, it's really hard to remove in 1 turn, and utilizing, again, that extra ability to draw an additional card on top of with these low drop characters, and just being able to replenish your hand pretty easily. Queen's Castle, the main difference between that, 1 less willpower, 7 willpower. However, as opposed to the library, what I didn't mention is each turn it gains 1 lore. The Queen's Castle gains 2 lore, and the Queen's Castle ability is at the start of your turn, draw any number of cards based on how many characters are there. So if you have 4 characters at the Queen's Castle, you will draw 4 additional cards at the start of your turn. It's a little bit easier though, especially with the release of Maui Shark in set 6. We started to see less Queen's Castle in a lot of these Amethyst builds because the Maui Shark is a 7 willpower and can just swing and banish the Queen's Castle in 1 turn. And then so that extra willpower with the library allows it to stay on board for an additional turn, typically speaking, and utilize its power, its effect a little bit better. So that's kind of the 2 main staples. Queen's Castle still very good if utilized in more of an aggro setting, and you're able to get your characters to that location. But yeah, we see a little bit more popularity in the library.
Yeah, I want to just also kind of touch on how powerful the library is as a 3-drop 8 willpower location. So to Mack's point, it's earlier in the game. It typically is going to last at least 1 or 2 turns before your opponent is able to take that library out. This was also a tech card, if I'm not mistaken, that Ed Chu put in his NA, like North America Championship tournament card
was.
to beat Ruby Sapphire. And the big thing was it's harder to remove locations. And if you think about the big benefit of these 1-drops in Amethyst, it's when they get banished. So what he was doing, it's actually incredible to watch if you do ever get that. If you haven't seen any of the streaming footage of the North American Championships, if you watch some of Ed's games, particularly against Ruby Sapphire decks in particular, like from what I can recall from watching it, is he would like put a broom in the location, and on that same turn, he would just play another character and banish the broom because he only paid 1 to play it. He paid 1 more to actually move it, and then when he played that second character, he got to draw 2 cards off the banish from the broom. And if you spiral that over just 2 turns, doing that with all these cheap one ink characters, you are adding a tremendous amount of card advantage because now you've drawn 2, 4, 6, 8 cards in a matter of only a few turns. And so he had a full grip of like the library can really, it can really snowball your card advantage extremely fast when used correctly. That's actually a card as an Amethyst player that I haven't used a whole lot of, but I think it's definitely one that has a lot of untapped potential. And if you can get good with that and knowing when to move characters into it and then do things with those characters, I talked earlier about buffing up a Diablo. If you did that with like a crab, you buff it up, you run it into something while it's in the library, you trade up and you get to draw 2 cards from your 1-drop Diablo that was a 0/1. I mean, that's crazy. So I think that's an important consideration for any Amethyst build is, do you want to throw a couple libraries in? It also just diversifies your deck as well, having locations.
Right on. The last piece of tech that I wanted to talk about was the mid-range and control tech items. So most present on my mind, since they're included in the deck that I played, are the 5-cost, the Elsa shift line. So the Elsa has a 5-cost card that is a 2 strength, 5 willpower. It has rush, evasive, and an extra effect that when it enters play, you can exert an opponent's character, and then you can therefore attack it or do what you will with it. The other piece of that shift line then is the 8-cost uninkable Elsa. That is 4 strength, 6 willpower, quests for 3, and then also when it enters play, you can freeze, if you will, 2 opponent's characters for that turn where they do not ready at the start of their next turn. So effectively, they're turned sideways for an entire turn, and they cannot be used by your opponent then for that turn in most cases. So that Elsa shift line is one of the big like mid-range or control options to really hammer down your opponent and get through some of the threats that they may be just standing up and leaving readied rather than questing with them or singing with them, whatever they may want to do, just because they want to protect them and prevent them from being removed from play. And that Elsa shift line kind of allows you to have access to those characters without allowing your opponent to gain benefit from their use. And then the second piece of mid-range control tech is Bell Accomplished Mystic, and this might be one of my favorite cards to actually play out on the field because it has such a strong swing turn when it gets played. Because then what the card is, it is a 5-cost inkable, 4 strength, 4 willpower, quests for 2. When it enters play, you may move up to 3 damage counters from any character to a chosen opposing character. So what you can do in many cases, and the reason why I feel like it feels so good to play this card is because you may have an Elsa or you may have a Genie or some other lower cost character that has a lot of willpower that has traded in or taken damage in other ways that may have extra damage just laying around on it. And if your opponent has a ready character or an exerted character, a character that you want to remove from the field, you do not have to trade a character you don't have to banish one of your characters to banish their character. You simply play your Bell, you banish their character. Now you have a character that is healed. They lose 3 damage counters, and your opponent loses that character card off their field, and you get the Bell on your side of the field in addition to that. So you are generating massive card advantage, massive board advantage in both respects, since you're playing one card, removing one of their cards, and effectively, in many cases, you're playing a new card next to Bell by healing 3 damage off of it. So you're playing 2 cards for the cost of 1 and removing one of the opponent's cards, and then also the board advantage that goes with that. So it might be one of my favorite cards to actually play out in the game because it feels so good when you get that swing to happen in your favor.
Yeah, so Ryan, while we're on the topic of the Elsa shift line, I think I've seen you and Connor use this to great effect as well. But I'd mentioned earlier this idea of saving your bounces till later in the game. This is also extremely powerful to bounce these characters who have an on-play effect because you get to keep reusing it. So for example, you can use Elsa, the 5th spirit, 2/5, 5 cost, quest for 1. When she enters play, she can exert an opposing character, and she has rust, so she gets to actually run into it as well. So you could do this to an opponent who's maybe questing a lot with like lower willpower power characters. You can take out a Piglet Pooh Pirate Captain before it even quests because you have Elsa. And if you have a snake in your hand, you can actually bounce the Elsa back to your hand and then do it again the next turn, right? So you can kind of keep recycling some of these really powerful on play effects by leveraging bounce correctly or efficiently, like with cards even like the Elsa, and then with the shift line too, it becomes even more challenging against a control deck because they get to keep freezing 2 of your characters by bouncing Elsa back and replaying her. The big one, the Spirit of Winter, the 8 cost.
Yeah, it's utilized very well, especially with the Rising Diablo as well. Elsa can one-shot, the 5-cost Elsa can essentially one-shot that evasive Diablo that can be very oppressive if you're facing it and your opponent is playing that card. 2 points I want to make before we wrap up here. One of the best songs in the game is an Amethyst, Friends on the Other Side. 3-cost Inkable, allows you to draw 2 cards. Utilized very well because it's in that mid-tier with the Merlins and the Mims. A lot of those, you see those cards sing that card to further gain that card advantage with drawing 2 additional cards. And then utilizing, since you sung it, you still should have ink available to play said cards that you end up drawing. But I think one thing we haven't mentioned yet is some of the other important evasive cards within Amethyst. One of them being Genie Wish Fulfilled, the evasive 4-cost uninkable on play. Again, another card on play that, to Nathaniel's point when speaking about Belle and the Elsa, on play you get to draw a card. It's evasive and a quest for 2. So a very powerful card in that sense, allowing you to immediately replenish. And then if it stays on the board, it's a high lore gaining card for a 4-cost, as well as, I don't have any other way to explain this other than Big Daddy Iago from the new set. 4-cost inkable, that's 4/6. Again, he's also evasive, but he has that trade-off because he's kind of it has an overpowered stat line. He has that vanish keyword, so if he is targeted with an action, he will immediately be removed. And I am also starting to dip my toes into the Jafar wheel package. I know Nathaniel is talking a lot about Amethyst Steel from the aggro and kind of that mid-range build, but another build we see from the Amethyst Steel side is with Jafar Striking Illusionist, also evasive, but while this character is exerted on your turn, gain 1 lore for each card you draw. And the most popular combination with this card is Singing a Whole New World. If you sing a whole new world with this Jafar, you immediately gain 7 lore. And when you gain a brand new hand, odds are you're going to be drawing another whole new world. And whether or not you can play that again on that same turn or your next turn, because typically speaking, it's hard to remove evasive characters, which Jafar is, you just kind of spiral that wheel. That's why it's called a wheel. You just keep spiraling that effect, and you gain an immense amount of lore really quick if you're able to get that on the board. And I've really enjoyed that because I like gaining a lot of lore all at once because I'm a degenerate control player. So that's my 2 cents on the evasive.
Yeah, I think while we're on the topic of kind of the different kind of play styles with Amethyst, I think one differentiation we should probably make is when you look at a card like Genie Wish Fulfilled and Merlin Rabbit, very similar, right? Rabbit's 2/3, not evasive, quest for 1, but it has draw when it enters and leaves. Genie doesn't get the when it leaves, but when it gets on play, but it has an additional willpower, it's evasive, and it quests for 2. So I think what you see a lot of times for those particular 2 cards, it's in the 4-drop slot. They're both uninkable. So the more mid-range or control kind of later kind of want to control the board and have longer games, you're going to see more rabbits most likely. And then the kind of I want to quest fast are typically going to go more towards Genie builds. So I ran that when I was running my more aggressive, quote unquote, lower to the ground purple steel last set. Genie, that is.
Yeah. This ink color is there's a whole lot of depth to it. There's a few other cards we didn't even mention at all that are definitely worthy candidates for you to be aware of. But I think we covered majority of the important pieces. The genie being one of the ones from set 6. One honorable mention from set 7 would be the new Queen, Jealous Beauty, where it kind of interacts with your opponent's discard pile, which is really important when thinking about cards that can kind of recur from the discard pile or have effects on the discard pile. But we won't dive into that now. Just know that that is something that you can look up if you'd like to learn more about the Amethyst ink color. Be sure to check out our Instagram page and our YouTube channel for additional content. We're going to continue our chase for an enchanted, and hopefully we'll start posting some gameplay on YouTube in the near future. But without further ado, let's get the duck out of here.